right. Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, welcome everyone.
You're all here for the talk on whether everyone should get free ice cream every day.
Yeah.
That'll come up later. No, just kidding. Obviously, you're here for the talk on multi-species ethics, how to relate, what does it mean to relate philosophically in a more than human world. Should we do our introductions and then we can have, yeah. Do you want to start with your?
Sure, yeah. I'm Kristian Brevik. I teach up at UVM, sort of broadly in environmental studies, but also in this world of multi-species relating, multi-species justice, multi-species art making. So all sort of thinking about human relationships with other species in that world.
I'm Jules. I'm Kristian's partner in many things, and I was a teacher for a long time until we had our son 2 years ago almost. And so the last 2 years I've been doing more work with Kristian. We work on a zine business together, among other projects, and a lot of the zines that we do are about, can you hear me okay over there? Yeah. A lot of the zines that we do are about multi-species relating. We've actually brought a bunch of them that are thematic to different parts of the talk that we're going to come to. Yeah, so maybe we'll be like,
later, yeah.
and this zine as we get to different parts. So to start, we wanted to also get to hear a little bit from you all, and we're going to have parts where we are each kind of sharing, or if you have a thought, or kind of discussion in groups. So if we could just do like a quick round of introductions. We don't want to spend too much time on that, but in your introduction, if you wanted to also think about something that you either believe makes humans special, unique from other species.
And in a separated kind of way.
In a separated kind of special, exceptional humans. Or something that you've heard as like kind of a compelling argument for why humans are separate from other species or unique. All right, we have to pick which side are we starting on.
Oh yeah, should we give them a little minute to think about it?
Oh yeah, no? Do you need a minute to think? I'm seeing blank stares. Does anyone want to start? Because we could just start anywhere in the circle, I guess. Put you on the spot. All right, yeah, great. I saw you smile. Go for it. Yeah, maybe name, like, where you're from, if you have a specific relationship to this or you're just interested in, and your reason.
My name is Eli. I grew up in Burlington. I went to UGM, graduated 2 years ago. I just heard about this today, actually, and so here I am. And I think I've heard that humans are different because they can think about thinking.
My name is Susan. I don't think this is on. I'm Susan, and I like what he said. I think that's why. I also think they have a little bit more of ability to have destruction and conniving and negative aspects.
I'm Caitlin. I live in Richmond, and yes, I was also going to say something about sort of metacognition as in that thinking about thinking piece.
My name's Nick. I also live in Richmond, and agreed about the metacognition and sort of the abstract thought is what comes to mind for me. I also was thinking about your point. You framed it as what makes us separate from other animals, and I feel like what we mean by separate is maybe worth digging into a little bit. Like every species is distinct, and I think one of our distinctions is this, but I don't know. But I got hung up on the word separate.
Thank you. My name is Abby. I'm taking an environmental anthropology class right now at UVM, and we're talking about multi-species entanglements and just human and nature, and like where does that culture, where does that nature dichotomy kind of shift? And I think a big thing that stood out to me is empathy. I'm not sure, I guess. I haven't maybe seen an example in class of other species showing empathy necessarily, but I don't know. I'm just here to learn, so I don't know.
My name is Chris Weed. I'm a Burlington resident, also a long time, recently retired. And I thought that was a really good place to start. And if there are other species that are, in some sense, capable of thinking about thinking, it's hard to say which one they are. There may be some surprises in that regard coming up in the next couple of decades, but and I better stop here. I'll just say I've been following what's going on in AI very closely for the last year and a half. So, but I want to keep that in the background.
Hi, my name is Bob Leidy, and I live in Burlington. And one thing that I'm fascinated with is, from what I've read, there's a huge growth in the autism spectrum, and autistic people often do not look at human beings as special. They look at all life forms as equal. Is that an evolutionary step?
My name is Faye Baker. I live here in Burlington, and I think of humans as animals, and I'm wondering if we're all being a little arrogant about our superiority.
Yeah, my name is Eliza Hammer. I live in Charlotte. I definitely agree with everything that everybody has said so far. I just finished a book called How to Be Animal by Melanie Challenger, and that we are animals. And I think it's fascinating that we look down on animals. You get to the end of the book and you feel like maybe animals should be elevated, and there could be a little bit more of a equality there. So I'm fighting very hard against the sort of the idea of exceptionalism, and I feel it's put us in a really bad place. Yeah.
My name's Peter, and we've been talking about this and things related to this, community and how humans live together or don't live together. Can humans even live together? And we know that there are animal species that do live and work together productively and safely, and we're not sure humans do. So.
My name's Jocelyn. I'm a grad. I'm Jocelyn. I'm a grad student in the English program at UVM, and I think what separates us most significantly from animals, if anything, is like our propensity for storytelling. Yeah. It's like a symbol at this point.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Owen. I'm a UVM grad last year. I like the idea of abstract thought, the idea of conceiving of something that hasn't been thought of before.
My name is Mia, friend of Owen and Jocelyn, and I read a book that Jocelyn recommended to me, and there was a line in there that humans are the only animals that are able to like have these existential questions, but I don't know. That's what I've heard.
Sure. Is that long enough? I don't know. I'll hold it for you. Oh, thank you. I'm Alex. I'm a sophomore at University of Vermont studying environmental studies. And I think humans are unique because we're able to like gather and have discussions like this.
I'm Sienna. I'm also a sophomore at UVM. I'm studying environmental studies as well. And I think humans are different. Someone said something about asking questions. I think that's, for me, that made a lot of sense, that differentiates us.
Does it work? It's not on. It's just not on. Okay, I see. Hi, I'm Lizzie. I have a background in libraries and archives, so I guess I think about humans being different in their the ways they keep records and use records of their existence, our existence.
I'm Jack. I believe that the main difference between us and most other animals is the fact that we have opposable thumbs, agriculture, and the time to use both of those.
I'm Annabelle. I live in Burlington, and I think the biggest thing that separates us from most other creatures is not necessarily just our ability to communicate, but the dynamic range and the capacity for flexible communication within our own created structures as well as outside with other creatures, not just ourselves. Because it's easy to communicate within your own group, but to communicate outside of it and coordinate is something that I find to be very unique.
So you can send it back around until you find something that hasn't spoken yet.
So what distinguishes humans from other animals is right. Thank you, other species, right? Inclusive of animals, but not. Right. My name's Cheryl. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Transdisciplinary Leadership and Creativity for Sustainability program, Go Resner. And also I am the Alumni Notes and UVM Amplified Coordinator at the UVM Foundation. I think that humans are, I think most of the ways I thought humans were different from all other species have fallen apart for me in my life. And I think the one that I still believe is that we have a sense of change over time.
Good evening. My name's Dove Schiller, and I live in Burlington. I'm an artist, a percussionist, an educator, and performer. My first gut response is that we are all animals. But what separates us and what comes to mind also first is that as humans, we have this amazing capacity to utilize our brains in a different way, but I think at times it's too much in comparison to other species.
Put it right back in here. Let's put it right in here. So you can slide over, you can go back.
Okay.
Okay, sorry to.
Oh, yeah.
All right. No, thank you.
Thank you to everyone for sharing.
Yeah, those are some good ones.
I think, our goal was to see if you could stump us. Do you want to respond and I'll hand these out?
Oh, yeah. All right, so Jules is going to hand these out, and I'm going to try to go through some of these and see if I can, I don't know if debunk is the right word, but respond, I guess, is a good word. So, one, I think the sort of like a step back response to this is, do all humans share this trait? Because I think in most of these cases, you'll find some humans who don't do this. Babies is a good example that kind of covers a bunch of them. And we often think of babies as human. And some of these, so abstract thought, I think is a great sort of thing. And science, so folks are, the first word of our talk is science, right? So scientists are researching this, and so there's a lot of evidence that animals like crows and apes are able to think about thinking. And the examples, the sort of studies that have been able to show this are about food hiding. So they'll be given food and they'll know to hide it when other members of their species aren't looking, so they can kind of be aware of what others know about them and thinking about how others may be thinking about their food is. That question of humans being destructive, two responses to that. I would say one is that humans have been around for about 200,000 years. And I'd say probably the first 190,000 of that was like pretty non-destructive, and then we have sort of this new ways of being that showed up maybe with agriculture or something that are more destructive. So there's something different about, and also now not all humans are equally destructive. There's certain ways that humans show up in the world that are destructive. And that other species have caused mass extinctions before us, cyanobacteria, and then when plants moved onto land, that triggered another mass extinction. So we're not the only ones. Do you want to respond to some?
Well, we're also not the only ones that do agriculture.
Right, ants
do agriculture.
Yeah, ants do agriculture.
Were there any? That you covered a lot of it. Well, I mean, I think some people talked about like storytelling or record keeping, and I think that sort of goes under the umbrella of symbolic communication, which we're increasingly learning that whales and birds, can communicate in ways that are not just like referencing something, but are actually like using essentially like words to communicate. And obviously not all humans use written languages, so the fact that whales don't use written languages doesn't make them unique from humans.
Yeah. Oh, the question, so there's good one about existential thought too, which I hadn't really thought about a lot, but there's, I believe, some examples of when, I think there's dogs that this seems to have happened with, and apes, when they're taught a human language and sign language, they start to ask existential questions, like why they exist and stuff like that. So that seems maybe to be more a thing about language than about species, which I think is an interesting question about.
That might be a stumper. Like, I don't think
That
we
might be
have
a stumper. We don't have an answer. No, these
an
are
absolute answer to that.
Right.
On the sheet we handed out, there's a list of a bunch of things that we thought people might come up with. And
Yeah.
I'm realizing, is it possible for like you two to possibly share? Because this group, did you not get a sheet?
No.
Oh, you did. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I thought you did.
Thank you, though.
Okay. So we came up with a list of like, here are things we think people might come up with, and here's why. Actually, there's no clear line between humans and other species. But I think we've kind of established that as the premise that we're starting from in this talk is that humans are not exceptional, or there's no line that can be drawn between humans that makes them unique from other species, not even genetically, that humans have Neanderthal DNA, and also it's kind of, you can't draw lines between different beings based on genetics. It's kind of like spectrums. So yeah, the premise that we're kind of starting from is that humans, there's no way to say like, well, only humans are moral actors because X. There's no line. So that's kind of the premise, the first premise that we're starting with. Then did you want to kind of talk about
this here?
Well, yeah. So then the next section we're kind of going to talk about is, okay, so taking as our kind of like assumption here that humans can't be separated in any way from all other beings, that's definitive. How do we then apply, like, what moral frameworks can we apply to, or philosophical and ethical frameworks can we apply in this more than human world?
Yeah, so I think part of much of philosophy, I think, assumes that that humans are special in some way. There's kind of this argument that is sort of one of the core flaws of Western philosophy, that there's this big distinction between humans and everything else, which leads to the range of questions that is asked to be narrower, and for certain questions to seem more difficult than there might be if other species are included in sort of philosophical conversation or ethical questions. And so, right, we think about the three branches of philosophy that we'll talk about today: epistemology, which is how do we know things, how are things known about the world; ontology, which is like what is the world, how does it exist; and then the third thing, which we'll spend most time on, which is ethics, how do we behave ethically in relation to others. And so a lot of different philosophers, indigenous philosophers and others, write about that the way the world is and the way we know things about the world are not distinct, because say we want to observe something with our eyes are also part of the world. So there's no, and their eyes are made out of what we eat for breakfast, which is then the molecules of our eyes. So the world and our knowing about it are totally entangled with one another, and they're not separable. And so, but our eyes are made of other species. Whatever you call it, your whole body is made of other species, like what you eat. So that is not separable.
So yeah, to think about the sort of like ontology, the nature of the world, the nature of existence or being, there's lots of different frameworks for thinking about this. One that there's sort of like a popular debate, and maybe if you're in academia, which maybe many people are, this is going to feel like a strong debate, and if you're not, maybe what I'm about to say will seem more like common sense. But one of the arguments about ontology is that there can be multiple ontologies. This kind of came out of anthropology and the ontological turn. And this is sort of where ideas about like each person has their own truth is something that maybe is kind of trickled into sort of popular understandings more from this idea. But we are arguing that because we can understand that each being's existence, each of our existences, each of, a bird outside's existence is mediated through all of the ways that they are, or we are, having to interact with the rest of the world, be it living or non-living. And so you can see that like in terms of like survival or something. Like if you are hungry and there happens to be an apple tree nearby, then you're going to have something to eat. But if there doesn't happen to, if there doesn't happen to be, a food source nearby, then that's going to have a consequence for you. So if there were each person's reality or each being's reality, first of all, it would mean that every ant has its own world from its perspective. And second of all, it wouldn't necessarily be clear how those worlds then interact with each other. But obviously, in terms of predator and prey dynamics and resource different dynamics, it's clear that we feel that it's clear that we are all living in one world, but we are each perceiving it differently. So that's kind of another premise that we're bringing to this, is that when you're considering a more than human world, it makes it less obvious, or it makes it sort of more obvious that it doesn't make sense that there would be multiple worlds, but rather multiple perceptions of one unified world, one existence.
Yeah, and on that perception of the world, does anyone know the story of the mantis shrimp? I don't know if you've heard of the mantis shrimp. Yeah, what do you know about the mantis shrimp?
Very strong punch.
Yes, they punch very strongly. That's how they kill their prey. They attack very quickly. Speed of a rifle bullet, I think.
And they were thought to have amazing color perception, but I understand that has been challenged, according to Ed Young, the science writer. Right? Many colors, can't perceive all of them themselves, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, and strong punch.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So they rely on this high attack speed to catch their prey. We have 3 types of cone in our eye to see color. So we have that range of color vision. Compared to our 3, they have 16. And so for a long time, people thought, wow, they must really see way more colors than other species, the sort of kaleidoscope of colors. But it turns out they can't. They're actually the worst species that has been tested on differentiating hues. So they show them different paint chips, like shades of red, shades of green, shades of blue. They really can't tell the difference. Where humans are much better at seeing colors than they are. But how their eyes work is all of our cones go into one optic nerve, and then that goes to our brain. For them, each of those cones they have a different nerve, 16 nerves, that go directly to their brain. So what for us is color, for them is speed, right? They see more quickly, so they can attack their prey more quickly. And I love this example because, it's easy for us to think we can see a movie in black and white, we can see a movie in color, we can imagine seeing in different ranges of color, but it's harder for us to imagine something that we perceive as color as speed, right? These are totally different ways of perceiving the world, but we can still, sort of the story of the blind man and the elephant, everyone touching a different part of the elephant, trying to understand the world, right? Still be in one world. And this also helps to sort of put aside our assumptions that the human way of seeing the world is an objective way, because it seems objective. It seems like we're seeing the world as it is, but the access mode, or the way that we perceive the world, really is based on how we evolved, why we evolved the senses that we did for specific reasons, and to see fruit, to hunt, to build houses, things like that.
Oh yeah, you're doing these.
Oh yeah. So all right. So that's kind of the more fun part is the moral question, ethical question. So for the second half, we're about halfway. Perfect. We want to move into the discussions of moral philosophy and how, if we're living in this world of environmental crisis and biodiversity loss, species decline around the world, climate change, how do we use these insights to learn how to live better within the community of life with these other species? And so, of all the different sort of frameworks of moral philosophy that folks have developed, a number of them can relate well or be used to relate to other species. So one is this broad group of consequentialist theories, which is it doesn't really matter why you do things. What matters is the outcome. Right? So it doesn't really matter if you meant to do good. What matters is, did you actually, accidentally kill the possum when you were trying to drive quickly to get to your friend's birthday party on time, right? The outcome is still the possum was killed by your car. So in subsets of this, utilitarianism, and folks refer to Peter Singer and animal liberation. This is this idea of utilitarian right? Maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. Sort of a more narrow view than some might take. Maximizing your own self-interest, or rule consequentialism, which is more based on society. We set a set of rules that we know based on statistical evidence or probability or however we want to measure it, that if everyone does this, then good outcomes will be maximized. And so even if, in smaller examples, it might be better to do X. For a narrower thing, on a broad sense, we want to sort of follow these rules for relating to others.
Great. One thing I just maybe is helpful when we're thinking about the sort of different consequentialist theories, I'll just put forward, and then talk about some other ones. If you're thinking about who you want the outcome to be good for, so in ethical egoism, you want the outcome to be best for you. And it's not that it's not just saying that you want that, it's saying that you ought to do that. The best way to act morally is to put your own self-interest first. That is in contrast to like altruism, for instance, which is saying you actually should put your own self-interest last, and that when you're thinking about the consequences, you want the other to be the person that you're, or sort of the place where you're thinking about what you ought to do to have it be for others. And then utilitarianism is kind of like an in-between in the sense that it says it's sort of the maximum good for the maximum number of people. So whether that's you or whether that's someone else, doesn't really matter. If you have to do something selfless, but it helps like 10 other people, that's what utilitarianism would say to do versus, maybe altruism would always say like you always want to be serving others, whereas ethical egoism would say you always want to be not just want to be, you ought to be. Like the moral imperative is to serve yourself or others for the greatest good. Some other frameworks that we felt we didn't have to rule out in terms of they could potentially apply in a multi-species ethical world is existentialist ethics. So it says individuals create their own moral values in a different universe. And I think probably we do if you're not necessarily a person that believes in a deity, which a lot of science kind of hasn't provided evidence for. Probably we do live in a different universe. So then, okay, some version of existentialist ethics apply. But sort of what follows from that is, okay, if there is no other reason, like kind of a higher power that's choosing like what is a moral way of acting, then where does morality come from? And so in terms of evolutionary ethics, there's sort of like two ways that I think you could think about this. There's one, the way that we act and the way that we feel that we should act is an evolved trait in the way that some genes have survived, or there's greater kind of frequency of certain genes than others, or some have been lost over time because of which ones have survived or not. The ways that we think we should act have survived, and the ways that we don't think we should act, those ways haven't survived. That's why they're not in existence. So that's sort of one way of thinking about evolutionary ethics. And then the other way is that, we all living beings, from bacteria to fungi to plants to humans, all sort of have genes that in a way want to reproduce themselves. And so there's another sort of framework sort of related to the ethical egoism that people kind of should act in a way that kind of, or those genes want them to act. So, and then I'll just speak briefly about some of the philosophies that we don't think apply. We're not going to dwell on this, and sort of why they may not make as much sense in this multi-species world. So deontological or duty-based ethics is the idea that you should act based on certain rules, and they could be, God-given rules like 10 Commandments, or they could be society-given rules. But those don't necessarily like come from more than human people, and so maybe wouldn't, like, why would those rules apply to an ant or something? Virtue-based ethics, so kind of like trying to act in a way that you have like good character, you're an upstanding person, sort of have good virtues. Doesn't also really make sense when you're thinking about other species being, like, is a squirrel who's very squirrely, is that a good characteristic for a squirrel? Like, it starts to fall apart when you're thinking about not just humans. Relativist theories that sort of morality depends on different contexts I think probably that is true, that there is some sort of context dependence for all decision making, but it's not necessarily going to be a helpful framework for how we should act that we want to get into. And then the last one, just natural law, the idea that there are sort of like laws about how people ought to act, that if you go out to nature, you're something you could learn from there. The question would be, well, like, where does that come from? How did those like oughts come into nature other than through evolutionary means? And also this concept of like human rights, or like, you know, unalienable human rights. Where do those come from if they are not given by a deity? Are they ensured by a specific government? In which case, like, those both, either direction maybe probably doesn't apply in the more than things are wrong. So that was a lot of different frameworks to think about, but so we're just gonna kind of keep that in mind. Now we're gonna get into the fun part. Or is there anything else we wanted? Oh, you kind of wanted to just talk about kind of how this expands questions, and then like this part.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
Get it, and then we'll get it. We're almost at the fun part.
Yeah, all right. So what we want to do, we're going to have you get into groups and think about a couple specific questions that we thought would be interesting to think about once you sort of allow other species to be a part of the ethical conversation. And one of the things that we think about a lot is that, like, once you take away this idea of human, the sort of magic wall between humans and everything else, this illusion of separation, then a lot of other different ethical questions, sort of the ground beneath them totally changes. And so that, like, in terms of what we eat, right, in terms of like folks thinking about veganism or vegetarianism, right, if humans should not eat a deer, then should wolves not eat a deer, right? If there's that sort of question. Things about like pronatalism or antinatalism. Is that only human birth that we're concerned about? Or are we thinking about other species birth? Cows having calves? And just like a range of sort of like questions about how, were there other examples that you wanted to?
No.
Yeah.
I think we should move into just.
Yeah, let's move into
So I feel like we're going so fast because there's like such limited time. We don't have time to discuss. So, okay. How we're thinking of structuring this is we're going to put a question to you all, which you will discuss in groups for maybe like 5 minutes. And then anyone who wants to share out to the big group will have an opportunity to. And then one thing that we think is really important is having not just kind of opinion-based discussion, which is important also to hear each person's opinion, but also to have kind of informed, and that's kind of like this sort of our scientific framework, informed discussions too. So we've kind of come up with some facts that we're going to give you, and then after you've shared out with the group, then you can take those facts, read them in your group, and decide, does it change your mind at all? You know, does that inform your opinion? And then discuss that with the group, and then share back with the group if it changed your mind or anything like that. So the first question is, should humans have pets? So
usually groups of like 3 to 5.
Yeah,
5-ish.
you're able to kind of get into groups here where you're
like 3 to 5 folks who are kind of near you. Groups of.
So we'll give you about 5 minutes to just discuss amongst yourselves, should humans have pets? This is our first multi-species ethics related question.
I'll bring some chairs around for you guys.
You talk, I'll just
What's
listen.
that? Oh, good idea. Great. I'll come. So, Peter, if you move over, I'll
Here's our
That was enough. I worked in many farms. And I think
I'm over. It's okay. We're missing because she's coming back, right?
She's sitting to you all for a minute.
Yeah.
So nice to you here. I'll just. Oh no, go for it. I'll sit here. Yeah, same with me. I grew up with all sorts of pets.
I grew up in a family that had pets. My mother was a dog, and
But I don't just say like having pets.
I think it's very important because then you start to realize the intelligence of a dog. I think if you've ever had a dog or a cat and you love them, you're pretty blown away by how rational and intelligent they are.
They can show everything.
Yes, yeah, and the way that they communicate may not always be maybe even telepathic sometimes.
Cats are a little trans.
Oh, I agree. I grew up in a dog household, so I was very used to having that. An animal loves to see you, and actually, it seems at least like they want to be around you. And then since coming to college, now I've been a cat, and it's like you have to earn his love and his affection, which is something that I was really I wasn't used to as a pet. I thought it was kind of like, oh well, I'm your owner, I need you.
It's not necessarily.
I love you because I love enough to love you.
I think sometimes there are some pets that have little cage is not very fit for pets. So some pets that we should keep because they don't have very but I think when it comes to dogs and cats and many birds and goldfish,
like I grew up on small farms, all manner of cows and everything. Sheep, everything. We had everything. And there was space because there was different. But I live in a place in Burlington and there's a tiny place, so there's just like a backyard. And I think it's a house dog. And I know that cats, in terms of wild birds and the effect that cats, domestic cats, have if you don't keep them outside.
I'm gonna just search around. You keep talking about your
desire in some way, but like desire to snack. I want to have food. I don't want to clean up. So do I want them or I would say one of the largest species that kill or deforestation that so in a way we've domesticated the animals in line
but also I don't really know like the way I've been tropical birds. I also have
one bird would sing and express, but we viewed it as joy, just singing wildly. And then something happened in the household and it stopped singing. And it's like, so what did you do that took away that bird's joy?
So one day the bird stopped singing.
All right, we're at time. So we'd love to, if any groups have anything they want to share from this, before we hand out our info sheet. Any thoughts? Things that came up. We overheard some great stuff, so I'd love to hear that.
We were wondering about the ethics of what we do. We were wondering about the ethics of like where we go from a world that already has domesticated animals that simply could not be released back into the universe, into the world. Interesting. Anyways, into the world, into the earth. Yeah. And so, like, aside from the question of, like, do we begin to domesticate or do we, like, breed animals? Like, what do we do with the animals that are already in a humane society or a shelter or something along those lines? No answer.
One of the things I just overheard, if it's okay to share, that I thought was interesting, it's kind of a feeling about there actually being a moral imperative to have pets because it kind of increases empathy. So by seeing the pets, then you see how intelligent they are, and kind of to kind of increase one's empathy broadly, there's a moral imperative to have pets. Was that a slight rewording of something I overheard? Yeah.
But that benefits the human. So I mean, maybe it benefits the animal too. I don't know, but that's a human sort of objective.
It almost seems like it's where, I mean, and I'm kind of rephrasing something that I heard, but it seems like it's a good question of, like, are we using a utilitarian framework where, like, theoretically humans have a lot of power? If every human was 10% more empathetic, and then that helped the world overall more, then, you know, that would maybe be good in a utilitarian sense, but would that be not good in an altruistic sense to the animals? You know, I think that's why we wanted to set up the framework of, like, what are the different frameworks? Because that's a really good point. Like, you're using the animals instrumentally. So, yeah. Any other?
I heard some good thoughts about, like, the. Okay, you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, we were also discussing the line between when something goes from a pet to, like, a pest, which she brought up here. All the credit there. You know, the cockroaches in your house who subsist off of your crumbs, or the rats, or, you know, the birds who go, the raccoons who go into your trash, stuff like that. To what extent do they become your pets as you are caring for them and they gain utility from you?
Maybe a similar distinction too. We got a little bit at distinction between domination versus maybe being in relationship. And so thinking of the cockroaches, yes, you want to dominate, but our pets, what does it mean to just be in relationship? Or you the example of, like, the squirrel that you come into relationship with by leaving nuts out. At what point does that transition into domination? And is that the line that we don't want to cross, perhaps?
Yeah, sort of the question of, like, autonomy versus domination, and where those, like, in all these different relationships. Yeah.
I think it's difficult to talk about absolutes. That, I mean, human beings notoriously have good relationships and terrible relationships, and our relationships with our pets mirror that. We have healthy relationships with the pets. We have very unhealthy relationships with the pets.
Right, yeah, I mean, yeah, because that's a great point. Like, you could say, like, should humans have friends, right? And it's like, well, some friends are maybe, like, toxic, and you don't have to, but you shouldn't say no friends, right? And I think this is another thing about moving beyond, like, more than human questions is, like, always flip the question and say the other thing about the humans, or in, like, to flip the questions around like that, to make sure to check ourselves, right?
I think it also differs greatly in different cultures and demographics. Like, what a pet is to someone in the middle of the mountains in Korea is very different than in Chelsea, Manhattan. You know, so there's really different realities for how that empathy is imparted, and what pet looks like for the animal just in the wild. You know. As long as there's balance.
My own thought, but it would be interesting to ask this question again and discuss it in the view of each of the 10 moral philosophies. Because sometimes you have pet owners that, you know, you get them on the news and they've been, you know, they have 15 dogs and they're abused. And then, you know, the other ones, you see the cute little dogs, you know, with the raincoat and the winter sweater and the booties. So there's this, and so which is it? Which philosophy is the owner choosing to impart on their relationship?
Yeah, I think this answers the previous point too, that, like, there's however many dogs there are in the United States, there's that many relationships. so that this term pets is like not, it's a category that we're creating that's sort of homogenizing 80 million relationships into one thing. And I heard this group over here too talking about like, right, there's a whole range of these.
I think as we talk about these ranges, a potential unifier for me that's brought up in our private or like small group conversation was effectively that, I'm going to paraphrase, that we, having a pet is to take that animal's agency, as per your example with the dog and the deer. You know, and so like no matter how loving the relationship is and how warm, there is a fundamental like I am making the decisions. Like yes, my cat asked me to go outside and I'm like, great idea, go outside. But on the big scale, I'm in charge and that cat does not have agency. And that's perhaps underlying all the pet. I'm not saying good or bad, but I feel like it's a big unifier.
It almost it has like a certain paternalism to it, because I think people have that with their children too, where it's like ultimately I'm calling the shot. Yeah, you can go to this friend's house or whatever, but ultimately like I'm the parent, you're the child, and yeah, I mean, it's maybe different because pets are adults in a way. Yeah, so
the kid you are going to grow up and will someday go forth, the pet will not.
Yeah, so a good example of this, and this is something that was really changed by thinking, or not just. It's a really interesting story, is in Australia, so Aboriginal folks in Australia would have pet dingoes. And what happened is they would go out during breeding season and often kill and eat the adults and take some of the puppies home and feed them. And then, so they would have these puppies, dingoes, who would stay with them for a certain amount of time. And then once they got older, they were free to go. They were free to leave. So it was this temporary relationship that doesn't really exist. Like we kind of have full, birth to being put down relationship with dogs and cats, but I think in other cultures there is a possibility that there could be these different ways.
That reminds me of a number of people here may have heard a story quite recently about a dachshund that escaped from its owners.
I saw a headline about that.
On an island off Australia, I think, if I remember correctly. And it was assumed, well, it has very little chance of surviving for any length of time. And in fact, it did survive. I think it was like a year. And somehow it avoided, snakes and various hazards that could have done it in. But
it found food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think of a dachshund as sort of a prototypical. It's kind of
very domesticated.
Domestic urban dog.
Did it get caught? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's now.
I know there's people that have their eyes on it, but did anybody? They haven't been.
Well, I think it took quite a while before anybody was even sighted.
Yeah. I have one to read if we pass it on.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna pass out. So this is our sort of fact sheet we assembled. So take a look at this, and I guess the question is, do we have a sort of how this changes what?
Yeah. And this changes when you have pets. I'm just gonna read this to help if it helps everyone. So fact 1: cats and dogs consume 25 to 30% of the meat consumed in the United States. Cats and dogs together, because of that, emit as much carbon per year as 14 million cars, mostly from the meat. Wow. This also means that 10% of the land area in the United States is used for growing food for cats and dogs, and therefore not available for other species. Most of the animals used in pet food come from CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, including industrial factory farms, where pigs, cows, and chickens endure extreme confinement, deprived of autonomy and the ability to practice their natural behaviors, despite being as intelligent and emotionally complex as cats and dogs. Free-ranging domestic cats kill 1.3 to 4 billion birds and 6.3 to 22.3 billion mammals annually. This is, though, mostly unowned cats, so there's some nuance there, as opposed to owned pets that cause the majority of the mortality. 80% of cats and dogs are spayed or neutered. In terms of, I'm just going to summarize this, in terms of the impact of pet ownership on mental health, it's very mixed in the literature. Nearly all U.S. pet owners say 97% say their pets are part of their family, according to a Pew Research Center survey. And over half, 51%, not only consider their pets to be a part of their family, but also say they are as much a part of their family as a human member. And the average U.S. dog owner spends about $28,800 over the lifetime of a dog. All right. These are very assorted different facts. So we're gonna give you another. Oh, we don't have that much time.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. I feel like it's good.
They also go later.
Yeah. All right. Are we okay if we go like 5 minutes late? You can leave if you need to. So we're gonna give you 5 minutes to discuss this in your group, and then we'll come back to share. And if you need to leave at that point, that's totally fine. So 5 minutes. My crickets will go off in 5 minutes.
For the second question.
So does this change your thinking on pets? Does this information inform your opinions about pets?
No, I already had those feelings about pets. So, no, it didn't change.
You already had that It would seem to me, though, that the percent that are neutered keep the population relative. If you didn't neuter, you just let them be feral cats or feral dogs. How much destruction would they do in the environment, or they just fall prey to other predators?
Apparently there are neighborhoods, like in the New North End, where there's so many feral cats, people can't get out to sleep because they're fighting. Yeah. And so they try to catch them and take them.
You're going to have to have a license for
Yeah, that cat owners are obviously trying to fight it, but this is one of the problems that is now. Enough feral cats are out there that they have caused a problem.
Yeah, so we need to keep all of the predators available. Well, no, that's right. I mean, that's one of the things. The predators, different species have different predators, and we get rid of the predators, and bad things happen. Right?
I started thinking, listen, you could say the real problem is doing almost anything far more taking care of pets or whatever it is. There's too much of it.
What do you think of the morale of breeding? So like one kind of dog is a Spitz. They were bred to run a rotisserie. So they're put into this little thing and they run a wheel that runs a rotisserie. Is that morally right? Dogs no, but that's how they were. That's how their evolution didn't design these dogs, right? Or cats. They're not designed. We designed them for our own use. That's a real essential part of humanity. Is altering evolution for our own use.
Yeah, so that's sort of a remark, exotic example.
No, I mean all of these, all dogs. Yeah, there's no such thing as a wild dog. Well, you can turn foxes into dogs. In Soviet Russia, they took 3 generations of foxes and killed the aggressive ones and left the more passive ones alive. And by the 3rd generation, the tail was not up; it was down, and it licked you and was a dog.
Actually, they were basically selecting for juvenile traits.
Yes. Wolves or foxes. It doesn't take many generations for us to to interfere with evolution and change the course of
So does this change anybody's mind? I wouldn't say that like this. Because that's what I'm going
But I do appreciate that. And it's also
would you be in favor of euthanasia?
I can see how difficult it is. We're a family that has cats, and we do consider them to be
family. Yeah. And it's a really intricate part of our lives and our children's lives. And then I was thinking, well, how could you replace that? And then I was like, if there were more little local farms, we could deal with goat farms just all over the world. So, play with the baby goats. I mean, I think that's a way
And the
door opens, goat turns off, and so this day I have this whole dream story that made and safety, who knows?
Billions. So, but then, to your point though, when you look at like making the skits, I think we've crossed the line into slavery with some of the animals, some of the cows.
I should make them chirp
like
again.
this discussion of the cows
And the chickens and
that's slavery.
I know. That's why we've been like talking so quickly. There's like so much to talk about with this, and we didn't even get to the second. We're not gonna have time for the second discussion. Sorry. If you want our facts on whether or not we should eradicate all ticks and mosquitoes, you can have our facts to go.
I'd love one.
But of course, it doesn't tell you the answer because you have to philosophize about it. But yeah, I'm curious with this more assorted pet facts. Did it change your discussions at all? Anything that people want to share? Yeah.
We were wondering about the ethics of making your cat a vegan or a dog a vegan in light of the facts about the factory farms and how much food is produced for pet food in unethical ways, but also at the same time if a cat or a dog should or would prefer to be eating animals.
And I think especially for cats, I know some vegans who've had pets and it's like pretty close to impossible to have vegan cats because they're carnivores. I think it's easier with dogs, but they maybe need special supplements, which humans need special supplements too. Like humans need B12 if they're eating a purely vegan diet. But yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
And you know, when you think about like circular economies, right? So we have chickens, and our chickens eat only the compost, and then they give us eggs. And so with all the food that's just thrown away in the U.S., what if that food became pet food and became a cyclical thing? I mean, it seems like there are ways to get around some of these issues in a creative way. The bird issue is a harder one to get around, but I don't know, it could inspire some interesting creative circular economy.
So some of the other moral issues that we brought up is often you could look at pet ownership as slavery, which although it's not one of the 10 Commandments, it should be. And another one was that we bred all these pets and we chose them to look and function like we wanted. And that doesn't seem particularly morally ethical.
Yeah. Wait, I just had a thought that I wanted to say in response to that, and I just forgot. Here, maybe it's the same as we go.
Of course, in all honesty, you could argue that's sort of to some extent, we humans have done the same thing with other humans, treat other humans as beasts, a burden of, we've sort of gone back and forth on that. I hopefully progress, but
yeah, I think this question. Sorry. Yeah. I think this question of domestication is a difficult one because say you bred the dogs to have no autonomy and love to be subjugated, but humans made them love to be subjugated, and that I think that's
exactly what we do.
Right. That's true. Yeah. I think the question with the compost, I think it's the questions of like scale and infrastructure. So let's say like hypothetically in America, there's one dog. There's plenty of scraps to feed that one dog. And then somewhere between that and a billion dogs, there's like a number of dogs that we could like figure out how to work with in some way. But scale is really important rather than absolute.
Well, and like if we were subsistence fishers and we had a bunch of fish heads all the time, it's easy to feed your cat that, but If we're not, then what? I remembered what I was going to say is this sort of concept of like love slaves, that we've created pets to be not like our work slaves, but our love slaves. And it's interesting, kind of this piece about domestication, and we do this to other humans in that kind of authoritarian, top-down kind of way at its worst. But I think that we also do this in like more egalitarian ways. Maybe it's sort of like, you know, I feel like in evolutionary biology, it's always like, why does this bird have this crazy feather? Well, it's sexual selection. Like people find that, you know, the other sex finds it attractive. And I think in humans, there's lots of traits that we have developed because they are helpful to other humans, or they're, you know, attractive to other humans in the ways that we've also developed certain traits in domesticated animals.
Other thoughts?
Obviously, we don't have answers on
The awareness that you've brought to the room is phenomenal.
Yeah,
Just to
great.
think about some of those facts, and it brings me back to some of my travels where I think things are much more sustainable in a culture like if you go to Nepal or to India, where there might be one pet dog that stuck around, so it stayed a pet, but totally self-sustainable. The food, whatever it eats, is what's there, or perhaps compost. And it was beautiful to see that. It's also hard to see if you go to San Juan or Mexico City and you see hundreds of street cats or dogs. But you know what? They make it on their own, and when it's their time to go, they go. But the owners, if there is a good owner that loves them, they're not buying into the corporate media that they have to wear the moose antlers and buy that Friskies product, you know? So just thank you for the awareness as we take care of our 12-week-old kitten.
I'll just throw out one other thing too. In terms of the bird question, we very successfully take our cats out on walks on leashes, and so just want to throw that one point out there. If I may advocate for that.
That is sort of the like answer to the impossible question. We were just having this like, we were trying to set up a thing where it's like an ethical question where it could go either way. It's like, do you think it's cruel to like never let cats out because then they're kind of like cooped up all the time, or is it cruel to let them out and then they have this, you know, outsized impact on other species? So,
but if anything, in case domination is a leash. So,
okay, there's no way out. The answer is there's no way out.
Thank you. Do you guys sit around? I can imagine what your kitchen table's like.
Yeah, we mostly argue about this all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was gonna say, we put out some of our zines that we have made on different things related to this topic, so I think we're gonna wrap up. But if you want to come and talk to us or check out these zines, they're like a lot of the topics that we talked about in this and more that we didn't have time for because we had way too many ideas and not that they could fit in an hour. You're welcome to come peruse.
Yeah, those intertable conversations are out at just the thing. So we do one a month, whatever we're kind of thinking about. We try to do that. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you.
Good job.